and for my final study for our class, I looked at Twitter, specifically looking at underage tweeters and how they are willing to tweet about illegal activity on Twitter, specifically underage drinking. So for this study, I looked at how social media has an increase on false identities online, and this is something we've seen throughout, even from before MySpace, that people are really willing to create a false identity. If any of you listen to country music, there's actually a song that epitomizes this, about how people can get online and recreate themselves to be cooler online. However, there's also a really negative side of this, also that leads to things like cyberbullying and the idea that social media allows us to kind of hide behind the pages we create. This can also be seen through passive-aggressive tweets or people who, I'm sure we've all seen this at Wait, who sit in the library and tweet at people who took their outlet or are taking too long in Starbucks, and there's no ramifications for that. If you just put it out there on Twitter, no one comes out after you, or very rarely. We kind of call you out on that decision. However, I think over the past few years, we've really changed from this hiding behind our screen to kind of flaunting who we are through social media. And this can be seen through an article called Ego Monster and how sites like Twitter and Facebook allow us just to promote all these activities that we do on a day-to-day basis. And so specifically, I chose to look at Twitter for this study. The New York Times has described Twitter as an online presence, the idea that people should enjoy an always-on virtual omnipresence. And this ties in very nicely with the book we read by Nancy Barron with the name Always On, who described that people don't think twice about undressing before a curtainless window from revealing intimate details about their lives. And so by using Twitter, whose handle to get you to tweet is what's happening, people are allowed to literally post everything that happens in their lives. And so I kind of looked at that and then continued on Nancy Barron's theme of a culture of whateverism. And I saw that as a shift from obsession with anonymity to an ambivalence about individual privacy. And when Nancy Barron addressed her concept of a culture of whateverism, she described it as more casual behavior in dress, language, and standards of politeness, often resulting in a diminished attention to monitoring how we present ourselves. And so looking at that idea, I was trying to think about how we as college students, specifically underage college students, have started not really caring how we present ourselves online and just want to do it in a way that says exactly what's happening in our lives. And so to conduct this study, I made a corpus from 185 tweets from 16 anonymous users, all of which were underage and were enrolled in one of two universities. I chose two universities simply because I chose one that was private and one that was public to show that it's not just a Wake Forest problem or just a private school spoiled problem. Furthermore, I used 9 females and 7 males, so it's pretty even in terms of that. The corpus also contained students who were affiliated with Greek organizations and not, again, just to show that this is not just a problem of Greek students or fraternity people who are more inclined to drink or anything like that. I wanted to be able to shut down that argument. Furthermore, all of them had their full name in their handle or Twitter bio, so there was no, again, you were not hiding behind the social media, it was blatantly your name. All except for one of the Twitter accounts I followed were easily cross-referenced on Facebook where their birthday was listed with the year. So they were all clearly underage, even if there's no question to their age. Within the study, I did not look at tweets which were retweeted from popular sites such as Total Frat Move or Condescending Wonka. And I made that decision simply because I wanted to show the ownership of people's words. And I feel like with retweeting, you could argue that was not your personal decision. I also didn't use terms like raging or fratting, again, simply to show that people could make an argument that they weren't actually drinking in that situation. However, I did find tweets that contained words such as drunk, hungover, or specific name brands of alcohol. So those were included. And then one important caveat to note is that I didn't include tweeters who were not tweeting about underage drinking. So this is simply not to say that all students who are underage tweet about drinking or drink in general. So that kind of, once I started looking at that, I decided to look at why and how people choose to tweet about drinking. So not just that it's happening, which the corpus clearly shows, but kind of in what situations people are more inclined. So the interesting thing about Twitter is obviously that there's a character limit. You cannot go above 140 characters, which means the words people choose to use are even more important. So throughout that study, I started looking at what words came up most often. And to show that, I created a Wordle, and the concept is obviously that the more the word is used, the bigger it is in this presentation. And then another important thing to note, especially when using a Wordle or an ANCOG, is that when people are intoxicated, they don't necessarily spell things correctly in their Twitters. And so some words would be, you'd have to go through with a hand, by hand to kind of find out what words were used. And then also things like drunk is different in a corpus than hashtag drunk tweeting. So drunk wouldn't be pulled out of that word. So there were some times where going through by hand was more helpful in the study. And so this is just kind of a visual representation of some of the tweets I found. And they're going to give me a way to tell you some of the interesting things I found and when and how people tweeted. The most interesting thing that I found was that no one was scared to use words I, me, or myself. And like we talked about with Highland's argument, stance and engagement, that self-mentions are one of the most interesting things to study because, as we talked about earlier, this really shows ownership of who was tweeting. There's no like, oh, there was alcohol here. It's blatantly I am drinking. Another thing that I personally found very interesting was the references to family. There were 10 individual references to either parents, mother, or family. And what surprised me the most that they were not negative. It wasn't like, oh, my mom found out I was drinking, I'm in trouble. It was always like, my mom, as you can see it here, my mom encouraged me to use my fake. So things like that, which provides an interesting caveat to the study, because my basis was on that there should be negative ramifications that we know about for drinking illegally. And so your parents promoting drinking can kind of add an interesting caveat to that. However, I think, especially given the fact that all of these students were enrolled in university, shows that we are aware of the consequences and that there could be negative ramifications from drinking. And then again, with the meta-awareness, I found it very interesting that several tweets had hashtags such as underage problems or under 21 or references to fake, which again, going back, implies that we are aware that underage drinking is illegal and there could be ramifications. The most important thing I think that I found was in absolutely no tweets was there any acknowledgement of external ramifications. There were several that acknowledged ramifications of being hungover or making poor decisions while intoxicated, but none of the tweets in this corpus show that anyone was concerned that what they were doing was illegal or that they were sharing with the world that their tweets were illegal. On that note, it's also interesting that 40% of the Twitter accounts I followed had no protection on their account, so anyone anywhere could access what they were saying. And then again, the other interesting thing I found was that most of the tweets were celebrating drinking or using the terms fine, good, things like that. And again, that was a little hard to discover using ANCOG. I had to go through more by hand since there was a variety of terms that implied this. But as you can see on these examples too, several people did use terms like casual or not a big deal. So that ties back to Nancy Barron's argument that we really have developed a culture of kind of whatever to our online presence. And so finally, I want to talk about what's happening, which again is the Twitter kind of handle to get you to start your conversation and why it matters. So this is this is how you can see, this is what pops up on Twitter when you go to tweet something. And then, I believe that what has happened was Twitter's handle, what happening, has caused us to really not have a problem telling people what happens, whether it's positive, negative, legal, or illegal, minor or major life decisions. And so I think there's been a shift to users who focus on confident individuality and announce what's honestly happening through all aspects of their lives. So in conclusion, what I discovered was that going off of Nancy Barron's argument, the concept of whateverism, a corpus study of tweets produced by underage college students really does show that this is true, and we have no problem flaunting and broadcasting to the world exactly what we're doing, despite any negative ramifications, which can happen.